All right. Well, welcome to the Burn Up Podcast. Honored to have a friend of mine. We've known each other several years now, Hugh Vail. He's the founder of Mustang Medicine, rewilding, does retreats, does a lot in training wild horses, does a lot of horse therapy. We're going to dig into a lot of cool stuff. His personal experiences, does a lot of work with both men and women in the healing space. We're going to touch on psychedelics and, the effect that's had on our life and all sorts of different things. So, Hugh, it's an honor to have you. Thank you for being on the Burn Up Podcast.
Yeah, thank you. We've been chatting a bunch to find,
We have.
now it's finally arrived.
It finally happened. It finally happened. You live down in St. George. You messaged me. I'm going to be up here. I'm like, great. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Let's do this. So let's jump into this. What is Mustang Medicine?
Well, Mustang Medicine originally was, I started a 501c3 and I called it Clapham Foundation. Now, Clapham is a little tiny town outside of London, and it's where William Wilberforce grew up. And William Wilberforce and his buddies, one of them was the prime minister. His best friend was the prime minister of England. And this is the late 1700s, and they were trying to abolish slavery. At that point in time, 1 in 4 women were prostitutes in London in the late 1700s, and the average age was like 16 years old. And, I was with the organization that rescued children from child sex trafficking, and William Wilberforce was a huge, huge mentor, idol of mine from like 2000. I think I read his biography in like 2002, 2003. So when I was with the organization that rescued children from child sex trafficking, I was very well versed in how William Wilberforce had actually shifted culture. That was his main thing. As he said, what we need to do is we need to make virtue popular. And I started an organization called the Clapham Foundation because William Wilberforce had one called the Clapham Society. And I then got in. I had always had horses, always loved horses. And I got in 2015, I got into wild horses. And I was just like, eventually one day I'm going to go get my own wild horse. And I went and adopted one. There's about 50,000 wild horses in the United States that are waiting to be adopted. And if they don't get adopted, they just sit there in these adoption facilities. And so I found a mentor. I went, and as I was going through this whole process of learning how to gentle a wild horse, which is a very, very different process than like just training and working with a domestic horse. I mean, it's like the more wild the horse, it mirrored back to me. And they say the horse is the mirror to the soul, but it like mirrored everything back that all my therapists and my psychologists that I had seen over the years. I was like, this is what they're talking about. It's like I could understand what the therapists were saying on the couch, but I could never embody it. I could never really like make it make sense inside of my nervous system. And part of it is I didn't even know I had a nervous system. It's just like, we live in our head. I live in my head my whole life because it's the way to try to avoid pain and make it make sense. Whereas the Mustangs, all horses, they don't have a prefrontal cortex. So they have the limbic brain, which is the emotional center. So that's the same thoughts, the same feelings, the same emotions that humans have. But they don't have a story that goes with their experiences. They don't need to make anything that they go through. They don't need to make it mean anything. They don't make it mean anything about the other horses. They don't make it mean anything about the humans that are in their lives. They don't make it mean anything about them. Whereas this is a part of the brain that we have. So as I was working with the horses, I started going and I followed around this guy who's a neuroscientist who also had become a horseman. And so he was explaining the horse brain versus the human brain. And when you're taking a wild horse and you're trying to gentle it so that it'll actually be a partner, I started seeing this is the thing I'm struggling with myself. Like the longest relationship any of us will ever have in this life is with ourself. I was with me the second I was born, and I'll be with me the second I take my last breath. And I didn't get to control who was with me, when I was born, and I won't have any say in who's with me when I'm when I take my last breath, but I will have had me along the way. And so my therapist and everyone was always trying to talk about, like, you got to be your own best friend. And I just didn't quite understand that. But I could see that in this. For me, I see everything in metaphors. So I could see, like, I'm trying to be the partner to this wild horse. And this wild horse perceives me as a predator. Horses know that humans are predators because we have eyes in the front of our face. And all predators have eyes in the front of their face. And all prey animals have eyes on the side of their face. And eventually I partnered up with my horse. I still have him today and post about him on Instagram all the time. And that gentleng process of watching this wild, dysregulated animal just so overcome with fear, trying to save and protect himself and doing the dumbest shit. I mean, they'll run into fences, they'll jump fences, they'll break things, they buck, kick, bite, bolt, do all these crazy things. And you're sitting there and you're just like, I'm just trying to feed you a carrot, right? And so I just thought so many times, I was like, I wonder how many times, like, the universe or God or my partners or anyone were just trying to give me a carrot, and I was just bucking and biting, and it's like I interpreted what was going on wrong because of my own wounds and my own traumas. And so as I watched this wild horse just go through a full transformation and an embodiment of peace and kindness and gentleness and self-regulation and emotional intelligence, I had to go through that same process myself. So then that turns into me building out some courses where people could come and they'd go through a 6-week course and they'd come out, to my little horse facility. And I was then helping them make sense of their traumas. And I was just using the wild horses as a mirror to them. And it ended up going really well. We had some friends, that you and I both know, Scott and Lorraine, and Scott came over with his flute and he started playing his flute and, like, opening up the space for us. And I wasn't even charging any money for it. I was just like, yeah, I'll do this for a couple of friends. And then they were bringing their friends back and they were bringing their friends back. And all of a sudden, like, hundreds of people had come. And then I turned it into a course and as like a 6-week program. And I originally called it Men and Mustangs because I was like, I want to create something for men. I saw all the women had retreats and they all had everything. And I was like, men need this. And, that was a mirror for what I really needed. And no dudes came. Like, is this all women? Dudes just came. So I ended up having Lorraine actually said to me after seeing one of my demonstrations that I did, and she pulled me aside, and I didn't really know them that well at the time. And she said, hey, I just want to let you know your Mustangs are like medicine to my soul. I can see myself in them, and I can see where I have some work that I still need to do. And so I changed it from Men and Mustangs to Mustang Medicine because of her saying, your Mustangs are like medicine to my soul. And then that ended up turning into retreats, and then it ended up turning into one-on-one coaching sessions. And I went and got formal education around this and got certified in a couple different things. And that's kind of like how Mustang Medicine came about. It was like never really a great plan. It just
as is life, right? Nothing ever goes as planned.
Yeah.
It's so funny. We get so attached to, like, outcomes, and I honestly can say nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever been exactly how I thought it was going to be. It's either better or worse or different, but it's never, and we get so caught up in that. It's fascinating too, just looking back, and I'm in a space today with everything I've gone through. I'm just like, I don't know. And like being okay with, I don't know. Like, this is the goal. This is what I want. I'm going to go after it.
Yeah.
And whether I achieve it or don't achieve it, or it looks different, like, I'm just going to surrender to the process.
Yeah.
And go towards where I feel called or what my gut's telling me to go. And when I hit a wall or a door's closed, today it's like, I needed to get to this door. And then by surrendering to the disappointment or the frustration or whatever it is, what I've learned is the more I surrender into that, it gives me, it expedites the process of noticing when that door closes, there's 10 more that just open. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That I didn't see clearly, but in order to see those ones, I had to go to the store that was closed.
Yeah. Well, and you said something actually really profound that I've been studying lately. There's three ways of knowing. There's like three brains inside the body. There's obviously our mind, but then there's our heart, and then there's our gut, and that intuition, that gut intuition. And I've always been really good. I've always had a great brain. Like I've always had almost like a photographic memory. I can just read things and I can recall them, and it can be 10 years ago. And I've also had like really good, strong gut health and gut intuition. And I've always been willing to follow that. But emotionally, like the heart center, that is where I think things have pulled me out of alignment a lot of times. And what I've had to do is to surrender to emotions and feelings, which has been something that I have largely been disassociated from, avoiding, running from. And it wasn't really until the Mustangs came into my life that I had to become emotionally intelligent for the work that I was doing for the people and really for myself. The people coming originally were just an excuse for me to do the work that I didn't know that I needed to do. And so, having emotional intelligence, I mean, I just didn't have any.
What is emotional intelligence? That's what a lot of people say that. Like, I have emotional intelligence. What is that for you?
So I see that emotions need three things. You need emotional intelligence, which is the intelligent message of the emotion. I believe that emotions are messengers, and they're just there to serve you. They're there to help you. They're positive, even anger, sadness, disgust, disappointment. These difficult emotions, I call them shadow emotions because they kind of lurk in the shadows and they don't feel good, and they're challenging to get their message. So I think you have to have emotional intelligence, but I think you also have to have emotional maturity to go with it. So when these shadow emotions like fear, anger, sadness, disgust pop up, I need to have the maturity, not only to be able to understand the intelligent message that they're sending me, but the ability to sit with it and feel it. And then I need to have emotional regulation. So when I'm struggling to sit and feel it, then I need to be able to have these somatic practices to be able to regulate with it instead of being driven by the emotion. Aubrey Marcus had a great thing he said years ago. He says, angry always overdoes it. So anger is this healthy emotion that's telling us, hey, there's a boundary that's very important to me, and I feel like it's being crossed, and I need to go fortify that boundary. But when I don't know that I just need to go fortify this boundary, then I don't really understand what anger is really there for. And anger for me, and I think for all of us, can quickly shift into angry. And then angry is coming in and we're stomping and we're smacking things and, we're puffing up our little peacock feathers. We're acting out. Yeah. I don't think that anger ever acts out. When we have the emotional intelligence of anger, and then the emotional maturity and the emotional regulation.
See, for me, I'm a recovering people pleaser. A lot of my worth was tied to other people's opinions.
Yes.
I hated conflict. I didn't want to have hard conversations. And my MO in the past was I wouldn't speak my truth. I wouldn't share what I was feeling.
Yeah.
But then there's this resentment that's building up behind the scenes, and then it builds up and builds up. And then all of a sudden I hit a breaking point of like weeks or even months of something, and then I just lose my shit. And then all of a sudden I'm like, and then, I vomit all over whoever it happens to be. And they're like, where the hell is this coming from? Right. And the truth was I was out of alignment because I wasn't speaking my truth and I wasn't managing my own emotions.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. See, I love the reason I asked about emotional intelligence. This is really on the forefront for me today is like, how do I manage my emotions? Like, again, I believe a lot of addiction, regardless of the modality, regardless of the substance, is rooted in avoidance. So it's, if again, I'm angry, I don't want to feel that. I want to avoid that. So in the medicine, the catalyst to be able to just even move through that might be something as simple as having a conversation or or, you might say in your partnership, marriage, whatever, it's like there's conflict and you're not dealing with it. And say, in our case, we're two men, our wives show up, our girlfriends show up and do something, and we don't address it or share our feelings in it. And we just get angry at them.
Yeah.
And then we don't actually address or lean into that uncomfortableness. Then we act out.
Yeah.
That's where we become angry, and then we don't want to feel that emotion, and then we get in our head, and then we turn to substance. I mean, it's crazy when the answer to so many of these things is it's leaning into the uncomfortableness and being okay, being uncomfortable. Like, and I've learned, having so much uncomfortableness and pain and all these things, and it's not like I want pain, but I've learned to embrace it.
Yeah.
It's just like, it just is. And I found if I sit in it, more often than not, the universe moves it literally within seconds, or a couple minutes. It's like, I just accept it. It's like, I don't want, what is this? And more often than not, you said earlier, it's a signal, it's a message that something else in my life is out of alignment. And I could even be projecting it onto somebody else or to something else. When in reality, it could be something as simple as I'm disappointed in myself because I didn't get up and work out, or I didn't follow through on my commitments, or whatever, So I agree with you. It's the messenger. And so if you can sit in it, I really truly believe that we can get really clear of what it is. And then the key thing is, once you have awareness of it, then you have to act on that and really move through it.
Yeah. I mean, anyone that's struggling with authenticity and has the fear of disconnection, which is like the most common fear that any of us have. But if I'm, then that's a perfect recipe for people pleasing. And I wanted connection at all cost and didn't know how to get it. And the connection, what I realized is that it starts with being connected to myself. And that's actually the etymology of the word authenticity. So the Greek word auto means self, and authenticity. So it's being in a genuine nature of your true self is what authenticity is. So when I'm compromising my authentic self or my authentic truth, it's for me, it was because I didn't even know what that was. I was so driven to find connection outside of me.
Did you find in that, like, the way I explained it is, you're wearing a mask, in a different mask with each person? So it's like, I'm showing up this way with this person, and I'm showing up this way with this person, and it's exhausting if you look back on it,
Yeah, and I felt like there were times that I was exhausting to people because I had my mask that I put on, but the way that I wore my mask was, my addiction was church. That like if it wasn't going well, I just needed to church harder. So if life was bringing pain to me, then I just needed to like sacrament harder, or read scriptures harder, or I just needed to church harder. And addiction, we now know, is the most human thing that any of us can do. And so my addiction my addiction was like really hard to see, actually, even for myself, because it looked so good. It looked like carrying your scriptures around and wearing your shirt and tie and having callings in the church. But what it really was is it was a drug for me. And it was a way that if I could just go read this scripture, then God was going to be really happy with me, and then God would bless me. And I do think that those things are true. But it's not really actually any different than someone being addicted to like CrossFit, right? It's like, well, if you go and you just CrossFit all day long, like God's going to bless you with this ripped body, and and so there are going to be these positive outcomes that are going to come from it. So I was getting a lot of positive outcomes, but what I was unable to do is really sit with my pain. And that's, like, to your point, though, that's exactly why we end up people pleasing. That's exactly why I wouldn't tune into my emotions, is because they're very painful. And feeling disconnected, or feeling like I'm going to lose this connection, there was such a deep absence of connection within myself that I didn't have any space for anyone in my external world to disconnect from me. Because, and this was all unconscious, but looking back on it, it's like, hey, you can't disconnect from me because I already got plenty of disconnection inside of me. And so now I'm willing to bend over backwards, do more than I need to do, put too much on my plate. Then I'm dropping the ball, right? But I'm doing it all to try to please and be such a value that you'll never leave me. And that's just because I have no space because I've already left myself. And so,
what do you think the catalyst is for someone to shift from a people pleaser, tying their worth to other people? Like, again, you're in the healing space. You've worked with literally hundreds of people. You've seen it all, if you will, right? What's the common theme? What do you see what typically happens when someone finally all of a sudden, quote unquote, wakes up, or quote unquote, first of all, recognizes, like, part of it's just having awareness.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, it's like, I didn't even, because it's just programming, subconscious behavior. Like for me, it took 40 plus years to figure that, like even to get awareness around. I didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
What's the catalyst? Do you see a common theme with a catalyst?
Well, I mean, Carl Jung said that you were going to be about 40 years old, and you weren't going to really have your awakening until you're about 40 years old. He said we spend the first 40 years like living in our ego self, and then we spend the next 40 years trying to undo that. And there's something that happens in the brain that starts to shift that I think causes us, and I don't know, I just turned 44 last week, and so I did the math, and according to the average person in the United States, I'm now 56% done with my life. And, you just start looking at that, and it's like, I think I thought life was going to be a little bit different than this, and I'm like 50%, 56% through with it, statistically speaking. And you start thinking about things differently, and I've also had I've had a tremendous amount of loss in my life. I mean, a tremendous amount of loss. And then you're trying to figure out ways to make peace with the loss. And then you achieve money. Like I've had great money at times and seasons in my life. And then I've, gone on the vacations and had the marriages and married the woman of my dreams. And I had all these things, and I still had this pain that was inside. So to answer the question, I say that pain is the great awakener.
Yeah, I thought you would say that. We're subconsciously programmed to avoid pain, avoid all of that. But the reality is the pain is the activator. Uh-huh. My tagline is freedom's in the fire. The fire is the answer. Everything we want is on the other side of what we're actually resisting.
Yeah.
And the truth is that's the catalyst. It's whether it's heartbreak, whether it's financial loss, whether it's whatever the loss, that is the activator. And I personally do not believe that you can actually get there without going through it.
Without it. Yeah.
The greater the loss, the greater the gain. And you also can't fully appreciate, I don't believe you can fully appreciate intimacy, connection, passion in a relationship unless you've experienced the opposite side of it. Heartache, whatever the pain of it.
Yeah.
Same thing with financial stuff, right? Knowing what, if you've always had money and, say your family wealthy or inherited or whatever, and you've always had money, sure, I'm sure there's gratitude and things in it, but you don't really truly know what you have until you don't.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. You have to have the contrast. And the human experience is wrapped in the realm of duality. To me, I'm very appreciative now, even though I don't attend any organized religion and I don't prescribe to any organized religion. It definitely served me in those first few decades of my life, and I would never take any of that back. Now, being addicted to it gave me an advantage too, because I read everything and I read the scriptures a ton.
And I'll tell our listeners, this man knows scriptures, teachings. I mean, he's a walking encyclopedia. So I just want to validate what you just said, that times 100. You're very well studied.
Yeah. And so when I got into, it was actually, through psychedelics, and there's a place for those. It started helping me to shift the interpretation of what I had read. So I think that the truth still is there's like hidden treasures of knowledge and truth inside of these scriptures. It all depends on how it's interpreted. And so, for example, going like what it makes me think of is the story of Adam and Eve. When Adam when Adam and Eve are taking from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, it's a particular type of knowledge. And I didn't see this years ago, but it's the way that I interpret it now. It's a knowledge of good and evil. In the Hebrew, you could maybe more accurately translate it as good and bad. Well, good being the opposite, the polar opposite of bad. And so I started interpreting it, and I had help from like Richard Rohr and some other really incredible, scriptorians, that this was the tree of duality. And the human experience, we're all partaking of the fruit from the tree of duality. So you have to have that contrast. And without it, there's not that much growth. And so having lost what I thought was going to give me everything I was looking for, that then like put me in a tailspin. And now I'm starting to ask questions, and I'm willing now to be like, well, I went through that door, and then what was inside of there was great, but then I ended up losing it. And so now I've got to go through another door. And now all of a sudden I'm gaining contrast. I'm widening my spectrum of experience. And then I'm finding myself in that spectrum. So there's just no way to be able to gain wisdom without contrast. And you can't have contrast unless you have duality.
Well, it's interesting. Before we started recording, you and I were catching up, and you had said, I lost everything.
Yeah.
But I found myself through that process. So again, now hindsight, looking back, did you really lose?
Yeah, yeah, that's so crazy. The opposite of duality is non-duality, right? So you have good and bad, right and wrong, this or that. That's duality. And then the opposite of that is non-duality. So you have all of it, and all of it serves you, and all of it is what makes you whole. All of it is what makes us one. And in that process of going from duality to non-duality, the thing you have to let go of is judgment. You've got to get to a place of non-judgment. Now, if you let go of judgment, you're not letting go of wisdom. What you're doing is you're gaining discernment. So judgment, even Jesus says in at the very end of the Sermon on the Mount, which is in Matthew chapter 7, he says, don't judge lest ye be judged. Well, I went and I read it in the original Greek, and the original Greek word is krinos, Krinos, and krinos means to make a determination as to what is wrong. And so this is why we fall into judgment, is because I'm like, that's wrong. And then I take all of my facts. And facts don't care about feelings, but emotions do, right? Because emotions are so attached to the feelings. So, and all of us have these emotions. You can't suppress. We can. I suppress my emotions a ton, but then there's no emotional intelligence. And so facts don't care about feelings, but truth does. And so what happens is I get out of judgment, and I let go of the facts, and I start looking for the truth. And the truth is always compassionate, except for the problem with looking at the truth is that it's super painful. Because when I look at what I lost, where I lost everything, I also have to look at I have to look at the facts of what happened. And I got caught in the facts. And then I'm like looping in the story. And then that pulls me into victim mentality. I'm like, oh, this person did this, and this person did this, and here's the facts. But I haven't arrived at the truth because I've got to take in so much more information, and taking in that information can be extremely scary, right? So it requires a lot of truth. And it was Jesus who said, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Well, if you slow that down, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. What it's implying is that the truth doesn't do anything, but knowing the truth is the catalyst for being set free. And that is what I think is so challenging for, until you lose you're captive, you're not set free. You think that I mean, I thought that I was free. At one point in time, I had the Porsche Cayenne. That was like the thing that I had to have, and then at another point, like I had to have the best horse, and then I got that. But I was always captive to all these other things. And when I started losing what I felt I had built my best life, and then I started losing it all, it actually pulled me out of the chains and the prison that I didn't even know that I was in. And then I can start to choose, what do I want? And that's what discernment is discernment is the ability to look at everything, not make a judgment as to what is wrong, but make an authentic choice of what I would most like and resonate with. But how do I know unless I've widened my experience on the spectrum? Well, to have gained so much also means that I've got to lose so much. And now I can start making an authentic choice, because when you lose it all, you lose your friends that you thought were friends. And then, there was attachments there that you didn't realize. And so losing it also, for me, took me to a place of like deep authenticity. Well, that's connection to self. So before I could get into my deep connection with self, I had to go through all the parts that I didn't even think that I could be connected to myself. I had to go through all those parts that I was actually disconnected from. And that was extremely painful. It's very embarrassing. And for me, it was I was embarrassed, for what I perceived that the public was thinking. Turned out most weren't thinking. Most weren't even aware. I was really embarrassed when I was looking in the mirror. That was where it was like, how did you get here? And you were supposed to be better than this. So now all of my judgments of myself are coming out, and then I've got to face them.
Which again is what you just articulated is what every single one of us in one form or another thinks or acts.
Yeah,
right?
You're a weirdo if you don't, in my opinion.
Well, so again, it's like, there's so many things you just said. One thing I want to say real quick, like truth, right? Seeking for truth. So, you and I could be, you and I could go, we do this podcast, whatever. We could go talk to the same person. They say how it went. We could, we're both here together. You could share something completely different than I share, right? Yet we're having the same exact experience, but your truth, if you will, can be different than my truth.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that, this is coming to mind. So, my co-parent, my ex-wife and I, we're good friends now, great relationship. But, as we went through the divorce, very painful, but then, getting to a place where we could start to communicate, and then getting to a place where we could actually talk about what worked, what didn't work. Her belief was that I hated her. Like, she goes, you hate it. And I'm like, what? And because for me, my disconnection from my own self-worth, like the loneliness I was feeling in the relationship, all these things, I didn't have the tools at the time, and it was manifested as anger. So anger was coming out as a secondary emotion, but at the core of it, I was lonely. I was disconnected. I didn't have self-love, all the emotions, but her story is like, you hated me, and hearing that, and I'm just like, well, that's not true.
Yeah.
That's not how I felt, but yet that's her experience. That's her truth.
Yeah.
And obviously her story, she gets to take that for what it's worth. And I've articulated all these things, and whether she's changed her story, I haven't had a conversation with a follow-up about that, but she can still tell that story or not. But nevertheless, I showed up that way, and she interpreted my emotions as hatred, and yes, I was angry, but the anger was rooted in my own pain and lack of self-confidence. So it's interesting. So her truth and my truth in the same experiences are very, very different.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And this is the challenging part about truth, is it's a paradox, is that two things that are diametrically opposed of each other are simultaneously true. And so it's like, is it bad? Yeah, it's bad. Is it also good? Well, yeah, let's interpret it in a way that it is good. So but good and bad are diametrically opposed of each other. And so this is where I think the mirror, because everyone in the healing space is talking about the mirror, but I don't think it's always properly understood. And it was a very, very hard thing for me to grasp, because what it was mirroring to her, and she's not here, and I don't know your guys' story, but what I think it's mirroring to her is your anger. She couldn't see that it was really about you. And that anger that you were projecting out to her was coming from a place of unawareness, where you're unaware of how angry you are at yourself. And because you're the longest relationship that you've got is with you, and you're not authentic to you. You're not taking care of you. And so then you're getting angry at you, but you're thinking that it's all outside of you. And so then it's unconsciously getting projected, out onto her. And I'm sure you were talking about her behaviors, and, well, if you would have done this and you would have done that. And so then we're pointing the fingers, and then she received that and actually took it, because you're never partnering with somebody who's at a different level of traumatic hurt than what you are. So in other words, we're always partnered with somebody who is at the same level of trauma that we're at. Now, that trauma can get expressed out in many different ways. This is the anxious and the avoidant attachments, right? So if I'm connected to myself, then I'm securely attached to myself. But a secure person is never going to go and partner with an anxious person, or a secure person is never going to go partner with a disorganized, or, they're only going to partner with other secure people, at least to that level of security that they have. So why does the anxious go and attach to the avoidant? Well, it's their belief of themselves and their connection to themselves, and how they deal with when it gets touched, and when they get triggered, is that they're anxious. So then they have found that I can go get that connection outside of myself by going and chasing it. And then the avoidant, it's the same level. It just expresses itself differently, so that when that wound is touched, they've never had positive experience to go chase the other person and get the connection outside of themselves. So they just go and isolate. And then this person, and so they've got the same level of wounding, that when that wounding get touched, it just exhibits itself or expresses itself differently, but it matches each other to be able to still not have to be alone. Because that's the biggest fear for a human, is to have to go sit with yourself and go be alone. So we're always partnering.
That's where the answers are.
And that's where the answers are. You can never really, this is a secure attached person, is somebody who has learned to have a relationship with themselves. And now when they have that relationship with themselves, they can go partner with somebody, but they're only going to want to partner with somebody who's got that same ability. Now you've got two people who can walk alone together. And that creates the security, because then you become very dependable, and then we can become interdependent. A lot of my buddies are in special forces, and that's one of their big thing in the spec ops community, is that they all develop their own ability to be able to go do the job that they need to do, and then they go do it together. And that's my definition of sovereignty. It's the ability to walk alone together.
I love that.
And so, and the whole being able to, you only partner with someone who's at the same level of traumatic hurt that you are. I mean, that's Dr. Gabor Mate. That's a bunch of the.
Yeah, you posted, I think it was your girlfriend that posted, or you get a thing earlier. It's you want to know your partner's love languages, right? It's actually know their trauma bond, or know their trauma.
The trauma language.
Yeah, trauma language. That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is true, because it's I think the more, for me, getting to know that side of it, and because to me it garners empathy, because we can react to how someone's particular behavior, but when we actually get to understand the core root of where that's coming from, it doesn't sting as much. We know where it's coming from. It's this wounded child, whatever it is. It's coming from a place of something that's happened in the past, and when you know your person's trauma, their attachment wounds, whatever it is, I believe it's a better way to connect. It's a better way not to react. And more importantly, it's a better place to hold space for your partner when they are showing up that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was always so distracted in how my partners were showing up, meaning how the trauma wounds were getting expressed. What I didn't ever understand is what are the trauma wounds that are getting touched. And that was the post that she made, and we do coaching on this. But she came up. She actually had this aha that you have that really popular book, The Five Love Languages. Yep. And so she was like, the 5 love languages are great, but we live in the world of duality and there's contrast. And so what are the opposite sides of it? And she's like, oh, well, the 5, languages of trauma. Now, trauma means wound. That's the Greek word for it, is trauma. And what it means is to be wounded or to be, fragmented or fractured. And so that's when you're talking about the 5 languages of trauma, you're talking about the wounds that are impacting the sense of self. And I got this. It's so crazy how reading the Bible years ago, I was reading the book of Isaiah, and he's talking about the Messiah, right? And this is a Jewish perspective. This is the gospel of the Jews is from the Old Testament. And Isaiah says the Messiah will come and he will be abandoned, abused, betrayed, rejected, and despised of all men. Well, I said, I don't think that there's anything worse than somebody who has a fractured sense of self. If you're abandoned, then you have no belonging. If you're abused, then there was no nurturing. If you are betrayed, then there wasn't any loyalty. If you are rejected, then there wasn't any acceptance or like unconditional love. And if you're despised, then you're not cherished, right? Those are the opposites of it. Well, as I started digging in and going into formal training and understanding, what trauma actually is, all of a sudden I see all these therapists coming out and they're saying the thing that fragments us from our sense of self is abandonment, abuse, betrayal, rejection, and I don't matter. And I was like, I wonder if they know that that's the book of Isaiah. And so, which can take us down a really interesting rabbit hole of what the Messiah is if you're abandoned, abused, betrayed, rejected, and despised, that's like the most fragmented sense of self. And so then what does the Messiah or the Christ, right? Messiah is the same word for Christ, it's just in a different language. Messiah is the exact same definition in Hebrew. Christ is the exact same definition just in Greek. And so when you're looking at somebody who's actually the Christ, why does the Christ become a healer? Well, because they were the most fragmented within the self. And this is supposedly the story of, as the story of Jesus goes, when he's talking on the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." And I was reading this scripture with a totally unhelpful interpretation. Perfect doesn't mean flawless. I mean, it does in our culture and our society today. So I went and dug into the original Greek, and the word is teleos, and what it means is complete or whole. So if you read that same verse, what it says is own your wholeness, realizing you are complete, lacking no parts, even as the gods. And so then it's like, why would that be important? Why would it be so important to realize your wholeness, to understand your wholeness, to own your wholeness? Why? Well, if this is the most important sermon that he ever gave, and this is like one of the core tenets of his message, is like, you can't have the Beatitudes and you can't do all these other things until you can own your wholeness. Why would that message would be so critical? Well, if you have the most fragmented, fractured sense of self, I'm abandonable, I'm abusable, I'm betrayable, I'm rejectable, I don't matter at all. Well, the antidote to that is to actually, what you don't realize is you don't realize how whole and how complete you actually are. And that's one of his core messages. And that is how you heal people, is you go and you identify what these 5 trauma wounds and these core trauma languages and all of the stuff we're talking about with like how it gets expressed, the anger that you had, the anger that I had, the people pleasing, the anxious and the avoidant attachments. These are just expressions of this fractured, hurt sense of self. And I don't know how, I don't even know that I have it. I don't know how to heal it within myself. And so then I go look for it outside of myself in my external world. And what a healer actually does is comes in and they just share that simple message with you. It's like, oh, you're actually whole and you're complete. And that's not something that that's something that the mind can intellectualize and come to terms with, but because the mind doesn't mean that the heart did. And that was where my major disconnection was at.
I mean, you can read it and study it and know it. Of course, it makes sense, everything you just said. But if you don't, you have to be able to embody it and actually feel it. And that knowing, that inner knowing is there. It's in your heart. It's just like bringing all of those, those 3 bodies you mentioned earlier into alignment.
And is that where you found psychedelics was so helpful? Is that it gave you the inner knowing?
So, psychedelics to me, I mean, in fact, the very first thing I ever did was Bufo, 5-MeO.
Yeah.
Which, people ask what that is. It's like a 6-hour ayahuasca trip in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, right? It's DMT. Yeah. And, I had this experience, shaman's there, and she looked at me and she goes, you're going to have 10 years of therapy in the next 30 minutes. And I didn't even know what that meant. It scared the hell out of me. This is probably 8 years ago. Plus.
It scared the hell out of you going into it or actually being in the medicine?
In it. Yeah. And what happened is, it's as if my heart was encapsulated in 6 inches of steel and it cracked it open. And I felt something that I had never felt before. But what I felt more than anything was actually the lack of self-love, self-acceptance, lack of authenticity. It scared the hell out of me, honestly.
Yeah.
But that was the catalyst, if you will, for psychedelics. I mean, to me, psychedelics, I tell people, my preferred medicine of choice is ayahuasca. I've hosted ayahuasca retreats. I don't, for me, and everybody has their own perspective, I don't think there's a greater modality to connect. I tell people it takes your conscious, your subconscious, and the divine, puts everything in alignment, and then rips away all the stories. We talked earlier about truth, and the truth can hurt. And if you're out of alignment, whatever your alignment is, if you're out of your core values, it will check you, and it is painful. And when you're in it, it's you and you. You can't run.
Right.
And it's this constant process of releasing and filling back up. Because I believe we're at 100% capacity all the time.
Yeah.
Whatever that is. And if we want more light, more happiness, more passion, whatever we want more of, it requires that we let go of the beliefs, the behaviors, whatever it is that's holding us back from that.
Yeah.
And many times we don't see it here consciously as we walk around. And with psychedelics, it removes that lens, if you will. People say you have this 5D experience, and then so you get the awareness of it, you see it, and that release is painful. When you get checked, and some of the most painful, grueling experiences I've ever had have been in plant medicine, and looking back on it, they're the greatest things in the world because it gave me awareness that I didn't have, stories that I had told myself that I'm doing this, and this were frankly bullshit.
Yeah.
They were just a story to validate my behavior and how I was showing up. And so, to me, I'm a huge advocate. You said earlier, there's a place for it. It's not necessarily for everybody. I mean, I think you get called to it. We've, know many people that have had incredible experiences, horrible experiences, bad trip, everything in between. The key thing for me with plant medicine specifically is that it's an experience.
Yeah.
It's basically like you get a glimpse into what's possible, what you need to do, whatever, but it's just an experience. And you can wake up, you can have your medicine journey, your night, however long it is. But the reality is, the next day, you're the same person you were.
No silver bullets.
There is no silver bullet. The real work, is the integration.
Yeah.
And I've seen so many people that keep chasing that high, keep chasing the medicine, but don't actually ever end up changing.
Yeah.
And then they get quote unquote addicted to it, or they go to it. And the reality is the work is after the fact. That's actually where it gets quote unquote hard, because all of a sudden it's like, hey, I saw what's possible. I can do this. But then it's like, now what do I have to do it?
Yeah.
And that's where most people get tripped up, is in the integration. I geek out on that now. It's like my 2 oldest sons have done it. And I've watched my boys as they've done plant medicine and really take integration to heart.
Yeah.
Same with me. It's like, okay, let's go. If I saw this is what I need to do. And I don't I mean, I feel like I integrate as well as anybody just because I know that when you don't, right, in some ways it can create even a greater depression.
Yeah,
You know,
100%.
you see this,
I've gone
let's say
through that.
whatever it is, the greatest thing possible. Okay, this is who I am, but then we don't act upon it. And then, but then we're in contract, we're in conflict because we saw what's possible, but here's where we are. And because we're not doing what we need to do to get there, it actually pulls us even lower.
Yep, 100%. Absolutely. I've had the same experience.
Again, summarizing, I mean, we could spend hours talking about this, but integration is the catalyst. It is critical. It is the key ingredient. Without it, I mean, there's no reason to do it, frankly.
Yeah, I actually did a lot of medicine without any integration because, and everyone was talking about integration, and I actually, I've tried to be more and more mindful of pre-integration and post-integration for both plant medicine, but as well as our retreats, as well as holotropic breath work. You're going to get these big, massive downloads, but insight doesn't change anything in life, right? Because you have to. It's helpful and you need the insight, but the insight is just living in the mind. And I had to learn how to take what I knew in my mind and then habitualize it into the subconscious, be able to integrate it into the heart space. And that is, I mean, I think you said it best, is that's where the actual work is. And do you ever have you seen that comedian Craig Coent? I think that's how you say it. Coent, I think is his last name. He's a white dude with long hair.
Yeah, he's the one that did. He talks about ayahuasca frequently. Yeah,
I might even send it to you, or you send it. Yeah. You send it to me. But he's like, he talks about how his definition of it is fantastic. He's like, it's a shot of consciousness, and consciousness just meaning I have awareness. But awareness is like step one of the multi-step process that has to take place. How I actually apply what I now have awareness of, how I address what I have awareness of. Do I have the emotional intelligence? Do I have the courage to look at it? Because I've seen some things in ayahuasca that I'm like, and as well as psilocybin. That's mine. That. Psilocybin and I you
have a good relationship.
Fantastic relationship. And I get a whole bunch of insights, but then I'm like, now what do I do with that? Now how do I live on that? And what happens in the pH level especially when you do ayahuasca, I actually just attended this amazing lecture on this, is the pH level reduces, and at a certain level in the gut health with the pH, and they think that this is around 7.2, and most of us are sitting around 7.4, 7.5 if you've got like a healthy pH level. But when you're on ayahuasca and you drop your pH level down to like 7.1, 7.2, cancer can't grow in that environment. So you've changed your gut health when you're there. With psilocybin, what's also happening in the gut is your pH levels are lowering, so you're creating a healthy gut environment. Well, we now know scientifically that serotonin, they think that about 90-95% of serotonin is produced in the gut, oxytocin, dopamine, right? You have all of these really positive neurochemicals that need a really healthy gut to be able to produce these chemicals. So this is some of the antidotes to depression, some of the antidotes to anxiety. So coming off of plant medicine, I would also feel really good for like 2-3 weeks afterwards. But that's because I've got a lot more serotonin, I've got a lot more oxytocin, I've got a healthier gut. So everything is and then I'm like, okay, that solved my problem. Well, and then I go back to eating, processed food or whatever, and I return back to my habitualized life, my emotional intelligence. None of that actually changed, and so now I've got the same stress, the same anxieties, the same way of processing how, my ex is doing this or how my buddy is doing that. And those are all dysregulating my nervous system. So then I got to go chase. Now I'm back in my pain, and now I got to go chase my next journey, and it just becomes this cycle. But I get more insight, and I'm like, oh, that's how heaven works. I mean, the first time I was on ayahuasca, there was this candle, like a real candle flame, and the flame started talking to me, and I was like, I understand the burning bush now. Like, I get it, Moses. Like, you know, whether that's a true version of it, it is a fair interpretation. Joe Rogan talks about the burning bush and the acacia tree and all that stuff. But I had this incredible insight, but my life didn't change at all. Like, coming out of that, like, okay, so maybe Moses was just doing some DMT, and he gets a whole bunch of. Well, he goes back down, and the people are still melting gold and building golden calves and having all these I mean, nothing really changes until you can integrate it into life, and integrating the shadow, integrating the positive insights that come. That's a whole thing. I would love to see some people come out and create like in-depth integration processes that are like 12-month long, 24-month long for what you're now learning and what you're getting, those insights, that shot of consciousness that you're getting from your plant medicine. Now, what is your integration process? Because you have to learn a whole lot of stuff to start making that embodied change.
Yeah, you know, one of the words that sticks out the most of what you said is, after coming through it, it takes courage, right? Again, my analogy of it's this release and fill up. Again, bringing a lot of the things we've said today in full circle, truth. The truth can hurt. The truth also sets you free. And my belief is a lot of people, and this isn't always the case, so let's just preface this, but I think more often than not, when someone has a quote unquote bad trip, they're in it, it's dark, they're having all these feelings. The reality is the medicine's trying to show you something that you're not quite ready to see.
Yeah.
And for me, the most painful, gut-wrenching things of just like, is this really who I am?
Yeah.
Like, is this really who I am? And you know, losing my company and doing things in medicine really helped me kind of work through that. More than anything, it was an ego death, and it was helping me accept and surrender. You know, my definition of surrender is I don't like something, but once I accept it, it loses its power. 100%. And medicine was a great way for me to surrender, to accept this, you know, ego death, if you will. But you know, you said this earlier, like that. My words is, you know, the hardest person we have ever faced, will face, or currently faces ourselves. And the truth, when we're not who we thought we were, or everything we believed isn't real, or whatever it happens to be, the light that plant medicine shows that, right? It's really just us. It's us and us, right? It's just that side of us that's like removing this wall or shade or whatever it is that we can't see, that it removes it, and then we see it, and the pain of that is, in many times, can be very painful, excruciating. And because then the stories, the beliefs, all the things all of a sudden get thrown up in the air.
Yeah,
and it's like, who the hell am I? You know? And I mean, I'm, in many ways, it's saved my life. It's given me purpose. It's given me meaning. But when I say the medicine's just a catalyst, it's a tool. It's really just brought me back to me. You know, I'm more authentic than I've ever been. I'm more in alignment than I've ever been. I'm more spiritual than I've ever been. And it's been as a result of facing the pain, accepting this shadow side. We all have one, right? But then not attaching to that, not that's my worth's attached to that. It's just, that is just part of me. That's who I was. That's not who I am. You know, there's a very distinguished difference there. And I have this whole thing too about keeping people in their I mean, people fuck up, they make mistakes. There's, you know, no one's perfect by any means. And it's so easy to hold someone in their past. I don't want to be holding my past. And so I'm like, I feel like I have more empathy now and less judgmental than I've ever been. I think more than most people. Whenever I hear that somebody did this or somebody did this, my now first go to is like, I wonder what else was going on in their life that happened, or there's more to the story, or versus trying to side with somebody gossiping or saying this or that about someone. Like, I have a whole thing around that. But medicine, again, is an incredible catalyst. But again, is a for those that haven't done it, just a warning. Like, get ready, because you are going to face all of you, and there's no running. And just get comfortable being uncomfortable. And if it's uncomfortable, lean into it, ask questions, and you will get answers. And they might not be what you want, but it's what you need.
Yeah. I'm taking a course right now from Dr. Gabor Mate. He developed an approach that fits inside of therapy. So it's not a method of therapy or a method of psychology, but it's more an approach that gets bolted on and attached to. And it's called compassionate inquiry. And fantastic. I actually think that if people just went and took this 12-month long course, it's 3 years jammed into 12 months. So it's like a full-time part. It borders on a full-time and a part-time job. I'm like usually 25 hours a week into it, and some of the other stuff I'm like 35 hours a week into it. I'm like, how am I balancing all of this? But I just think that everyone should go get certified in compassionate inquiry. Compassion is the gateway to truth, because you're going to face all of your stuff and there's no running from it. So what unlocks it is the ability to have compassion for why I was that person. Also, Dr. Bruce Perry, who wrote a book called, he co-authored it with Oprah, and he's one of the leading and most successful therapists that's out there. He's got his own retreat, and they're more like a recovery kind of center. But his book is called "What Happened to You," and what he's really trying to do is, instead of saying what's wrong with me, he's trying to just shift the question to what happened to me. And if you have compassion, you can sit with the truth. And when you truly have compassion, then you can face the truth. And the problem is that on plant medicine, without having a lot of compassion for myself, there was nowhere to run, and I was trying to run. I didn't want to look at it, because if I had to look at it, well, then what would that mean about me? And it was what I was going to make it mean about me. And turns out I was a total asshole. So I was like, no. And my ego's like, hey, I need to protect you from you because you're an asshole. And so let's get out of here. Let's run. And then the ego's, I say that my ego is my inner protector, who's Paul Blart, the mall cop, and he thinks he's a Navy SEAL. So he's just like screwing it up terribly. And he's like, let's run or let's fight. And he just has like no actual skills to do that. But I'm trying to protect myself from looking at these things. But why am I trying to protect myself from looking at these things? Because I am going to be my biggest critic. I mean, I'm going to crucify myself for who I've been and what I've done. And that's why I love compassionate inquiry, because it actually teaches you the skill set of developing compassion for yourself. And for connection to take place within the self, you need three things. You need context, you need choice, and you need compassion. If you can have context, choice, and compassion, you'll get connection with the self. So I've got to contextualize. Instead of why was I doing that dumb thing, it's like, what happened to me to cause me to think that that was the best way to go about it? And this is in alignment with what Brene Brown's always talking about. And she's got that really incredible story where her therapist said, do you think that everyone is doing the very best that they can do? And she's like, no. And, I read that years ago, and I thought the same question. And I was like, there's no way that people are doing their very best, which was a mirror that there was no way that I was actually doing my very best. But then when I really started to be able to contextualize, I saw that based on the context of what had happened, the education, the emotional intelligence, all those things put together, my ability to regulate my nervous system, my ability to even be in my body. I refused to be in my body. I just wanted to live up in my head because I could make it make sense. Didn't even have to be true. I just had to believe it was true, and I could make it make sense, and then I just could avoid the pain that was inside of me. So you have to have all of this stuff. And then I started seeing and having this compassion for myself. I started realizing, oh my gosh, like I truly have been doing the best. And now I can express that true belief that everyone is doing the very best that they know how to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Hugh, you and I could spend hours talking on these points. Where can our listeners find out more about you?
Mustangmedicine.com is probably the easiest, best place. We also built our own private app. This is because Facebook, Instagram, you get thousands and thousands of followers, and then you make a really cool post, and then you look at the analytics, and then you see that like 98% of new people saw the viral post, and I'm like, well, I just wanted my people to see the post. I don't need new followers behind that. So we went on the Mighty app and we built out, and we've got tons of books, ebooks, online courses, and we are putting that on our Mighty app. And so just go into like any of our social media profiles, we have the hyperlink to our Mighty app, and that's a place where you can come in. And then when we're making our posts, everyone gets to see it. We get to nurture everyone. We're putting all this stuff out there for.
Yeah, and we'll put all your social handles in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
But Hugh, brother, it's such an honor, and I just, even when I first met you and just, following you, I mean, you live down in Southern Utah, we're hours apart. We don't see each other all the time, but it's just cool to see, your progression and all the great work you're doing for so many great people. And just, again, your awareness and coming back full circle kind of finish, just like you really being in your authentic self.
Yeah.
And I honor that. And and having been on both sides of that myself too, right? I just honor authenticity.
Yeah.
Even if I don't necessarily agree with someone, I'm like, respect.
I appreciate. I got friends.
Like, I don't have to agree with what you're saying, but I honor that you're just being you. Like, more power to you.
And they're trustworthy, right? I've got friends that they're just holy crap. I mean, they're struggling. They're in pain. They're living lives that aren't really serving them very well. But they're so authentic, and I'm just like, dude, we're friends, because like. Yeah. Authenticity is so trustworthy. It's like I actually don't care, as long as we're not hurting anybody else, and you're trying to not hurt yourself, and you're in your pain and everything else. I have so much compassion and patience for that. But that's also a way for me to, reciprocate that compliment back. So thank you, because I see the authentic journey that you're on, and then you see it in each other. I don't see the world as I am. I don't see the world as it is, right? I see the world as I am. And so I've loved watching your journey. I've loved watching your post. I've been a big fan of it because it's authentic, and I get to see my authentic self in your expression of your authentic self.
I appreciate that. Thanks, brother.
So I appreciate it.
Thank you, and thanks for everybody joining us. We'll see you next time.